have now built a solution that runs in the cloud as a platform, as a service. It can take on virtually any amount of workload. It will scale out automatically. We wanted to have, or we have message queuing, and by having that we can also support both ordered delivery, meaning that messages will be guaranteed to be processed as they come, as a queue, first in, first out. But you can also use it for parallel processing if you like, so it's configurable. If you want to, for example, just do serve any amount of calls that are coming. It's easy to publish web APIs, and they can come in like 3 types. Request response, which is when the API is called, requested, and you get a response after a certain amount of time. You have request polling, where you can request something and then get a URL back to poll for a result if it takes a very long time to create, which is the case in sometimes. And then there's the fire and forget scenario. All 3 are supported. We have scheduling, very kind of like advanced scheduling, where you can do an arbitrary period, so arbitrary scheduling, you can say. But we're also adding more types of event-based triggering. So, for example, to trigger message that come via email or another type of queuing messaging system. We support long-running integration workflows. So technically, an integration workflow persists its state between each step. So after every step in the workflow, the state is persisted. So meaning that it won't consume any resources, and it can take any amount of time. It can take years if that would be the case, which is not normal, but at least hours. And we know that is important in for some integration scenarios. We support error handling and restarting. So, for example, if a machine step using a connector fails because there is some problem with the system that is being called, or the credentials are wrong or something, you can correct that error and then restart the integration workflow. And it will pick up from the last successful step. We support advanced transformations using something called liquid templates. I will show that, but also XSLT transformations for more complex XML messages. And we have monitoring and message management, which of course is a very important part when it comes to integration. You need to be able to see all the integrations that you have and how they are performing, if they have failed or not, and you need to be able to go in to look at an individual integration execution and see how it went, etc. And that's error handling and of integration workflows. All right, so to explain how it works, I'm going to go through this little animation here. So assume that there is an existing Flow server with Flow Studio, and there's a Flow developer developing machine workflows for an integration scenario. When the Flow developer has done the local unit testing, so to speak, of the machine workflow on the Flow server, he or she will go to will publish the ID of that machine workflow to this integration engine in the cloud, and thereby exposing a HTTP web endpoint. And the client can then call this endpoint, as you can see here. And that client can be a system either internally within the same company, or an external client at the vendor or a customer. The message of that call is put on a queue, and if there, depending on the configuration, this parallel versus ordered delivery processing, a worker picks up the message from the queue and starts the engine execution of that machine workflow. And it does that by retrieving the machine workflow from the Flow server. So it's the exact same workflow definition residing on the flow server that is being fetched by the integration engine in the cloud, and then starts the execution of that workflow. So, and for each machine step that occurs in this machine workflow, another call is made to the Flow 6 server to execute that specific machine step. And as many of you know, the configuration of the connectors, being the machine step, resides on the Flow server. So everything is as normal as when you develop a machine workflow. It's also the benefit that you can reach systems that reside on-premise with this mechanism. Okay, so of course this assumes that the integration engine hosted in our cloud tenant can reach the Flow server over by some mean, and we have some options here. You can either publish the APIs of the Flow server on public internet. There are mechanisms to do that securely. You can, if you want to have more security, you can do that over a VPN connection to our cloud solution. You can also use something called hybrid relay connectivity. Very technical, but it also enables connectivity between the integration engine and the Flow server.
Question.
Yeah.
Or two questions. So from my presentation earlier.
Sorry?
There for my presentation earlier.
Yes.
Yeah. So as I mentioned there, we use scheduled workflows for generation, which is, this is a perfect example of something that we would want to use the integration engine for in the future. We have two problems with that. One would be solved by this, which is the catching of the errors and so on. But what do you have a way of handling if you say have 3 machine workflows where the second one can't run until the first one finishes?
Yep.
Right. So you need some sort of queuing between the workflows.
Well, I think you would accomplish that by using fragments instead. Is that what you mean? So the first machine workflow calls the other one when it's ready.
Yeah, maybe it becomes irrelevant once you have this, because the reason why we have 3 is because it's too big to run as one machine workflow.
Okay.
And the second part, you said it would pick up from the machine step. And for example, if you have one machine step that is looping, this is something that we run into a lot of problems with. Say it loops for 1,000 work orders that it's supposed to generate, and it fails on work order 501. How do you ensure that the 501st aren't retried and it picks up from the 501st?
Well, okay. So
that, but
very quickly, the state after message 500 will be persisted automatically after each step, and so if 501 fails, that it will pick up. If you fix something and retry, it will pick up from that exact state.
It wouldn't pick up from the beginning of the machine step, it would pick up from the where it was.
Yes.
That's really good.
All right, good questions. So let's look at some more questions and see if this is too small for you, so I'll read. Is the integration engine only for Flow Connect, or is it also for Flow 6? It's prepared to work with both. First and foremost, Flow 6 for now. Can the integration engine be installed on-premise? It currently can only be delivered as a platform as a service from our cloud tenant. How can a cloud-based integration engine access my legacy on-prem systems? Well, I talked about that. We call the connectors that reside on the Flow server. Is my business data stored in the cloud? No, we don't keep any sensitive business data after a successful execution. And for failed executions only for a limited period of time. Is my business data transferred to the cloud? Well, no, not really, but yes, in the sense that if you call an HTTP endpoint with your business data, then obviously, yes, that data will be sent there. And we will use it for processing and then discard of it. It's up to you, and it's up to the solution. Can I interact with multiple business systems in one integration workflow? Yes, you can, as many as you like. So for example, in the HR onboarding integration I talked about, you access several systems. So it's not only one or two, it's whatever you can think up with and use machine workflows in Flow for.
Question?
Yep.
You say it's like an add-on.
Yep.
Is there an add-on when it comes to license as well? Or how does
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Happy to...
Included in any of the different levels you have?
Sorry?
Is it included in any of the levels you have? Like,
I'd have to refer you to one of your key account manager. Are you from...
I'm a partner.
I'm a part, yeah.
Earlier, and Axel said he would go through it tomorrow. So.
Yeah, so let's talk about that in a different forum. I'm not going to cover it today.
Can this also be used or combined with the user interactions?
Yes, but not in a machine workflow per definition, but a machine workflow can activate and trigger the execution of a user flow to add some data or correct something and then get that back and continue. A brief look at the roadmap ahead. So this is not a very detailed roadmap, and for a reason. We want to engage in an active dialogue with our customers and users to define and prioritize what comes ahead. But on a high level, we are here at market release in a month or two. Then we are plan to add more enterprise authentication style of authentication of APIs. Today we support API keys. I will show that shortly. Add more workflow triggers. So today we have the HTTP web endpoint, and we will add more. For example, some queue management systems and email, etc. We will add a visual mapping editor when you need to map messages, incoming and whatever is needed by the workflow. And then start releasing integration template workflows. That will be on a continuous basis, but by that time we will have a fair amount of them, I would say. Okay, let's look at this then. Okay, first a brief walkthrough of what it looks like. So here's the monitor and management web app for the integration engine. It basically has two main entities. It has flow servers and integrations. Flow servers are whatever flow servers you have licensed and want to connect to the integration engine. You add one by adding a name and description, if you like, then the server URL and your credentials. Let's have a look at the one we're going to use today. It looks like this, and I can test the connection, and it works. So now that you have your flow servers added to the integration engine in the cloud, you can start adding integrations, and you do that per server. So here are some integrations that we're going to look at today. So this is like your list of integrations that you have here. The machine workflows that you have published as integrations. So and here you can see the type. These two are web endpoints, and this is a scheduled ones. They can be enabled or disabled, and last run and their status. If I go into and look at the history of one, it looks like this. So here's the monitor of the execution history of one specific integration. And I can click on that. It only had one. And I can see it has a green light, so to speak. It executed successfully. And here I can see the steps of its execution and the duration. So this is for troubleshooting and monitoring. Yes?
It's a little bit hard to see from here. So
Yep.
Sure, but you add the flow to the server as with the ID for it, right? And how does it work if you have a subscribe flow from, as we use it from test, we subscribe to production environments, but those gets the same
No.
ID except from the server name.
You need to copy that, copy the trigger, we call it, from the test environment to the production. So you need to create another trigger.
So you cannot subscribe anymore?
Yes, you can.
Production environment?
Yeah.
Because they will have the same ID, I mean?
You had an environment selection at the beginning. If you, yes.
Oh, sorry, didn't.
If you go
I misunderstood your question.
Yeah.
So here you can see all your environments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go to flow integrations.
And then you can see the integrations for one environment.
Okay, sorry.
Yep, no problem. Okay, I need to speed up some. Okay. I'll show the rest while I demo. Now I would like to, I have this use case. So assume that I have Salesforce as a master, source of master data for customer accounts. And when customer records are created in Salesforce, I want them, no, this is the wrong one, sorry. Oh, yes, it was, sorry, having presentation view. So I have Salesforce as a master of data for customer records. I want them to be added in IFS as well for invoicing, accounting, etc. So I need to establish an integration from Salesforce to IFS upon the event of creation of customers in Salesforce. I also want to make a bidirectional reference for future synchronizations. So here is Salesforce. It will push data about the customer record through the to the integration engine, which will save it in IFS. IFS will return the ID of the customer record created in IFS, and the integration engine will report that back in the request response dialog here to Salesforce. So Salesforce can save that ID, and by doing that, I can in the future push changes from IFS to Salesforce. And one very common scenario for that is, for example, when accounting or on the finance department, they for a customer that doesn't pay their bills or something like that, or a credit limit is reached, often the customer is credit blocked, and you want that credit block to be pushed to the CRM system so that your account managers can take action, or at least don't sell any more services or products to that customer. It can also be other things. So for example, in accounting, they're often very good at data quality. So they might see that the customer name is not really the correct one. This is like an informal name. This is the legal name. We want to have the legal name, and we want to push that back to Salesforce. Account managers are good at many things, but maybe not data quality. Okay, so we're going here. I have IFS here, and I am looking at a list of customers, which is empty.
Nope.
You are, but not we.
Sorry. Now you see it. IFS, empty list of customers. Salesforce, empty list of customers. Flow Studio, an integration, machine workflow. It has a start ring. It says it needs ID and name. I do a machine step that calls IFS. And here you can see that it adds the name, creation date, and ID on the identifier reference field of the record. It adds the Salesforce ID. And then it's ready and returns a list of the record that comes from IFS when the customer is created. Let's have a look at, now I have the machine workflow. Now I want to publish that as a web HTTP web endpoint so that I can use that endpoint and go to Salesforce and add it as a call out webhook, it's called. So that Salesforce will call that webhook when customer records are created in Salesforce. So here's how I create that HTTP web endpoint for my machine workflow. I point out the machine workflow. So here's a list of all the machine workflows on my flow server. I've added a name. On trigger type, I have selected web and authentication type API keys. I have generated a key. And here are two settings that are about the concurrency of execution that I talked about. So if I want to guarantee some order delivery or maximum 2 parallel executions or something like that, I can do that here by doing like this. So I want never more than 10 parallel executions of my machine workflow, because the systems it calls are fragile or can't handle that much load or something like that. And here's the maximum number of seconds a request will wait before getting a response. So kind of a technical thing, but in the response dialogue between Salesforce and the integration, it will wait for up to 60 seconds for a result.
What will happen if they fail, both those two?
So the first one can't really fail. It will throttle the number of parallel executions. So never create more workers for this integration than 10, even if there are more messages in the queue for that type of machine workflow.
Just wait.
It will wait. Those will wait in the queue. This one here, if 60 seconds elapse before there is a result, it will return HTTP code 202, meaning accepted, and also a URI or URL to the polling endpoint where you can poll for results in the future, which is a common pattern. It's HTTP standard, you can say.
Can you throttle over the entire server or only throttle over the integrations?
Only one machine workflow currently.
So this is not a timeout.
It's not a timeout. It's a timeout for the caller.
Yeah.
So that
If you have a process that then takes 2 hours to run, it will still continue.
Yes, the execution will continue.
Yeah.
Then I also have a data processing tab. Here I can create mappings of messages. So here's what I will get from Salesforce. I know that. It's from the spec, so to speak. But here's what the IFS machine workflow expects, as I showed you on the start ring, remember? Now I need to create the transformation from the Salesforce message to the machine workflow format. And I do that by this liquid template language, which comes from the web world. And I've done that, and I can test it. And here's the result of my test, and I can see that it fits with what my machine workflow expects. I also have a mapping of the resulting message back to Salesforce. Okay.
Where did you get that code from? You have to write it directly as this story.
Which one?
What you're showing, like this call here, you have the beginning and then you have the body there.
Do you mean the machine workflow?
They just came from the API definitions, right?
Oh.
So he just copied it.
Oh, right.
JSON.
Okay, yeah, thanks.
Sorry, yeah, thank you. It comes from Salesforce. Yep.
Transformation, could you, let's say that in Salesforce you have one value and then another value in IFS. Is it possible to transform in that step, or do you?
Yeah, you can transform values as well, but you're limited to what the liquid template language can provide, but it has several functions for different type of transformation.
Okay.
But what you cannot do, you can't do lookups in your transformation, if that's what you mean. So that's a transformation you need to do in the workflow instead.
You can convert dates.
You can convert dates, exactly.
Which I assume.
Yeah. Okay, now I'm ready to test this. Let's create a Novacura account in Salesforce. Now it's there, and now Salesforce is triggering some code that will make a call out to my web endpoint. And I can look at that, the history here, seeing that. Here you can see it's already done. So let's have a look in IFS. Let's do a refresh. And here's that account. If I look at the details, I can see that here's that field that I showed you before, the identifier reference. This is the identifier of the customer account in Salesforce. So let's go directly to the next demo, which is the sync back. It is implemented in another way. For that, I've done this machine workflow. This is supposed to work as a scheduled machine workflow, not a triggered machine workflow. So every time, if I set this to execute once an hour or once a day, which is quite common in master data, in the field of master data, you make a nightly sync of data. This machine workflow will run. It will get the IFS customers with an IFS ID and write back some information back to Salesforce. And then I've published that machine workflow as this one. Here you can see I pointed out that one, and I say trigger type of type timer. I want that timer to begin at a certain point in time. It can be in the past or in the future. If it's in the future, the timer will stay resting until it's time to start working. And then I create a schedule by saying that I want this to be run, for example, once a day, or at a certain what do you say? The interval of hours to repeat this schedule on. So I've set it up to be at every minute, on the minute, this trigger will run. I need to enable it. Okay, so in this case, the scenario is that we are providing parts to our customers, and they are ordering those parts either from our web shop or via their own punch-out webs. And in all of those scenarios, the web shop and or the punch-out webs want to be able to query us via IFS the available quantity of a specific part per warehouse. Are you following me? So it's a typical scenario in a web shop. You want to be able to see, can I order this item? How many are there in stock? At what warehouses are they? Because that will determine if they need shipment that might take long, etc. So we want to provide an HTTP endpoint that can, given a part ID, can give that type of answer, the available quantity. So I've made you always start by doing your machine workflow. Yep, thanks. So here's the machine workflow for that. It queries part inventory in IFS. I'm not going into details now. And then I use this flow script to summarize available quantity, deducting reserved quantities, and deducting in-transit quantities. So a simple flow script to get the result that is expected by those who call my web endpoint for this. Then I go here. Once I have the machine workflow, I create a new web HTTP web endpoint for that. So here I point out that machine workflow, and I just say that it's of type web, API keys, etc. I don't do any data processing here for simplicity. And just to show you that it's possible to do without. And then now for demo purposes, I will use Postman. If you're not familiar with that, it's a tool to just call HTTP web endpoints. And I will call, here I get that the endpoint of my machine workflow. And I get that from here. Here I could try the webhook here in the management tool if I wanted to, but I do it in Postman. So I copy the URL from here and I paste it into Postman, and then I submit the body, and this would be the body that my machine workflow starting expects, because I didn't do any transformation, remember? And now I press send. And I can go here and I can have a look at the run history for that. It looks like this. It's the wrong time zone, but this is the one. And if I go back to Postman, I see that I got a result. And it looks like this. So here I get a structure in JSON with the available quantity per warehouse, which can then be used in the web shop or in the punch-out webs. And if different customers would require different type of formats from the result, I could add a new trigger for a new web trigger for the same machine workflow, but with a transformation of data. Yes?
Yes, you just answered that question, but I was wondering, because you can already do this without the integration engine, the get message. We're using it quite a lot. Like you just do generate web link and so on, but I assume the only difference is then here you can add transformations to give. You
can add transformations. You can take on any really huge workloads. That's not something that's hard to do today, but easier here. You can take on bigger workloads from your callees, those that are calling your web endpoints, and if you have trouble downstream, so to speak, then you can add throttling so that you don't overwhelm your downstream systems with calls.
Yeah. Well, we have quite big ones already.
Good. Yeah, I know it works. Here you also have management and monitoring, etc. Yep. Yes?
Yeah, go ahead. When you're creating an endpoint call, can you yourself define the address now? Because in the current solution, the system is generating the address for you.
Right,
if
yes.
you change to another one, you can't use the same address, and everybody calling it has to change it, the address they're calling.
Yeah, so when you create a web, so if I would go here and try to do a new trigger for the get part inventory available quantity machine workflow, then I could have any name here. So like demo name 1. But I could also have a GUID if I don't want like a human readable name, or I don't care about that, or an identifier, or it could be version.
Yeah, so this will be a part of the address that's.
Yeah, exactly.
The system is calling. Yeah, perfect.
Exactly. So if I now select, if I do like this, oh, I need authentication apparently. Now I've created a new trigger here, and I can go back to edit. I can press run, and I can even run it from here, but it requires input, so it will fail.
Yeah,
but
okay.
yeah.
And also the API key is something you can decide yourself, the system is purely suggesting something to you.
Actually, it's generating the API key, so you can't. Currently, you cannot define your own keys, but
So if you're replacing one flow with another one,
yeah.
they will still have
Yes.
something else.
So key management is something that we have on the roadmap. So, for example, labeling them, etc.
So could you scroll to the right side of that URL just to see the end?
Yeah. So no, but I'll do like this.
Yeah.
So this is what it looks like.
So yes, yeah,
So, and this,
yeah, it's the key that.
Yeah. we support sending the API key both in the URL, but also as a header.
Yeah.
So let's try this one. And there's the response. Okay. That's it for demoing. How much time is... Do you know how much time I...
We are over time.
We're over time, right. So I'll just end there. And thank you so much for your attention and all your questions. Looking forward to engaging in more dialogues with you about this.